Saturated versus unsaturated molecules. So you've probably heard of this referring to fats, and that's why we kind of care about this. So this right here, this is my saturated example, and this is my unsaturated example. What do you think makes this saturated and this unsaturated? All right. The answer is saturated has all single CC bonds. So we don't care about these double bonds because organic's all about carbons, right? So all single. So I remember that saturated single, SS, saturated single. So saturated has all single bonds, and then unsaturated has at least one double, or I should have also written there, triple bond in it. Okay, so between C's. Again, I don't care about these with the O's. It has to be between C's because organic is all about carbon. So saturated is single, unsaturated has at least one double or triple bond. Where did the word saturated come from? If you look at this, saturated, in what way is this saturated? So saturated means like full. So I think it comes from the fact that this is like full of H's, whereas this kind of has like this bald spot where they couldn't put H's because the double bond kind of filled that bond. So I think the word saturated comes from the fact that it's like saturated with H's. It has the maximum number of H's. Right, so why do we care about saturated and unsaturated? We care about it with fat because one of them is healthy and one of them is unhealthy. So if you look at this saturated, that is your unhealthy one. And then this unsaturated is your healthy one. So why does that one little bond make this one healthier? It has to do with how these things, these fats, clog up your arteries, and it has to do with how well they can like bunch together to form a really dense little clog in your artery.
Kevin, it's not.
Okay, sorry, my kids are up, so I had to find a new hiding spot. So the whole reason that these saturated fats are unhealthy is because they form this perfect zigzag, which actually makes them fit together really nicely and densely in your, say this is your vein that the blood's trying to get through, your artery. You can stack up a whole bunch of these perfect zigzags really tightly. They just fit together really nicely. So you can get this really dense, I messed up there, dense clog in your artery because they fit together in those perfect zigzags. And now you have this really dense clog in your artery. The unsaturated fats, on the other hand, let's say this is your artery, and maybe one has this little kink right here, and then the next one maybe has a kink right here, and a kink right there. They don't like fit together nicely just because of that little kink that's formed when you have a double bond. So now they don't really like stick together. So they're kind of just going to keep flowing through your arteries. They're not going to form that nice, densely packed, perfect little clog in your artery. So unsaturated fat does not clog your arteries. Except for when it does. So there is this one kind of unsaturated fat that is bad for you, and it's called trans fats. You might have like seen it, like heard like, oh no, trans fats, or that has a lot of trans fats. And the problem with trans fats is that they were unsaturated, but they were bad. And I'll show you the reason why. So here is a trans unsaturated fat, and here's the other kind that you never hear about because it's not bad for you, cis unsaturated fat. So this cis has the nice kink in it that's going to make it really hard to clog your arteries. But the way this double bond is in there, it ends up still having that perfect zigzag shape, which is going to fit together nicely and still clog your arteries. So the problem with trans fats is that in food labels, like when I was a kid, it would be like, oh, all unsaturated fat. No, they could advertise no saturated fat. But they had these trans unsaturated fats that were just like saturated fat. So it's like people would be deceived by a food label because it would say no saturated fat, but really it had trans unsaturated fat that's just like saturated fat. So that was the problem with trans fats. So those are now labeled on food labels. So now you have saturated, unsaturated, and trans fat labeled on your food labels. So that is a good thing that we've done here in America. Good for us. Okay, so just to summarize, saturated are saturated single, all single CC bonds between the carbons, and those are the bad ones. So the unhealthy unsaturated have at least one double or triple bond that puts a kink in the chain that now makes them not able to stack up as densely in your arteries, and that makes them the good fat. So that's like the fat you'd get from like avocado or olive oil instead of the bad fat like from fried food and ice cream, which I love.